So I'm really pleased today to be here with Professor Amy Brown from Swansea University. Welcome. Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself and your work?
Okay, so I'm a professor at Swansea. I lead a MSc in Child Public Health. So we do lots of stuff around all the research and evidence base around caring for babies, families, pregnancy, birth. So it's very about looking at what evidence we have and where we get it from. I'm also a researcher, so I predominantly look at women's experiences and families' experiences of caring for and feeding their babies, and look at how we can support families to get the best evidence-based information possible in a way that is understandable and easy to relate to, rather than being, like overly scientific when you've been up half the night.
From your research, what's the evidence for and against routine-based schedules for infants? A lot of maternity nurses will be expected to put the baby into a routine when they're talking about 0 to 3 month old babies.
Yeah. I think if we go back sort of historically over the last 50, 60, 70 years, the idea of routines was really quite central to kind of caring for babies, wasn't it? There are a lot of experts back in the 50s and the 60s in particular who believed that babies should be put in a strict routine, and they slept and they fed at these set times throughout the day. And they were held up as experts, and they wrote books about their methods, which sold lots of copies because I think they promised parents this kind of dream that their baby would act that way and they could get their lives back. But actually, when you start looking back at those books, there isn't an evidence base for them. They're based on someone's experience and someone's thoughts, rather than research that has been collected and conducted over years. So this is actually a key question that I started asking probably about 10 years ago now, after my own experience of having babies and looking at all these different parenting books that were there around strict routines. And I won't name them, but there are some very specific ones that say,
there are a few out there. Yes.
You can get your baby, sleeping 12 hours a night and feeding every 4 hours, and getting really frustrated because I knew the evidence around what was normal for baby behaviour. So the physiological research and the anthropological, that's a long word, research that showed us what was physiologically normal, that babies wanted to be kept close for their safety, they have tiny tummies, they feed frequently, their sleep patterns are not as developed, they need support getting back to sleep at night. So I knew what these books were promoting didn't marry up with what we knew about normal babies as such, normal baby behaviour. So when I started looking at them, once I'd come out of the kind of baby fog of having newborn babies, I wanted to know what evidence they were based on. And there really wasn't very much reference at all to whether these ideas of whether you can get a baby in a routine actually works or not. So we started doing some research then, kind of, first of all, looking at what happened when parents tried to put their babies into routines, so particularly for feeding. I was looking at breastfeeding mothers in particular, ones that wanted to put their baby in a routine. What happened? What usually happened in the most cases was that breastfeeding went wrong for them. So they were very soon saying, I haven't got enough milk. My baby just seems really unsettled when I try to feed them. They're screaming, they're wanting fed much before this schedule, and often, unfortunately, it ended with women not being able to continue breastfeeding and saying they didn't have enough milk, when actually it was probably because they were trying to feed them less often that they were making less milk, and that sort of self-fulfilling prophecy. So I started on that, and then we went on to really look specifically at these books that promoted routines to parents to see if they actually worked for them. We looked at mothers who had used these, ever read these books, and whether they could actually use them. And we found that for some families, they did work, or at least the families interpreted it that those books were working. So they were saying, yeah, it worked, it helped my baby sleep for longer, my baby fed less often, this made me feel really good, I really like them. But that group of mothers was only actually about 15% of those who responded. And what I think was going on is that those babies were just generally a bit more leaning towards that sort of routine themselves. So all babies are different, and some babies will sleep longer, some will go longer in between feeds, and sometimes with those babies, if you kind of encourage them slightly gently in that direction, it can sometimes work. But I think the data really showed that most of the time it didn't. And for me, the most worrying thing was for the families who said it didn't work for them, that their risk of postnatal depression, not feeling confident as parents, not feeling like a good mother, feeling frustrated, anxious, even feeling like a failure, all increased. And you can see the story again. They were worrying about their baby, really wanting more routine and more sleep, try to use these books. It didn't work. That promise fell apart and they felt even worse. And some of them were saying, well, I was blaming myself. I just couldn't get my baby to do it. And actually, well, why these? It's kind of absolutely normal routine. If someone tried to do it to you, to make you sleep for a set amount of time or at set times, say you naturally go to bed at midnight and someone walked in and went, right, it's 9 o'clock, you're going to bed now. Would you immediately fall asleep for 8 hours, or would you be there wide awake? And I can't imagine a situation where you went, right, I'm thirsty, I'm going to have a drink, and someone went, nope, you've got to wait another hour and a half, sorry. I don't care how hot it is or what you've been doing. So as adults, we know we have our own rhythms, and interfering with that doesn't work. So our research basically says it probably doesn't work, and it can be quite distressing for parents. You'll come across some studies that suggest things like sleep training do work. But again, going back to those earlier ideas, it's about really looking at what they did in that research, asking who took part, what they asked parents to do, what they actually measured, and whether that actually explains the conclusions they came up with. Just off the top of my head, one study that really fits this is a study that's often circulated and kind of held up as a study that says that if you sleep train your baby will sleep for longer and you'll be happier. When you actually go into the paper and look what they did, it's really a different story. And if you start really thinking about what happened, you can kind of see that that's not actually what would really have led to those conclusions. It was a study done in Australia with mothers who said they were really stressed about their baby's sleep. And what they did is they put them into two groups, and one group received information on sleep training and the other group didn't. And what they did is they measured sleep beforehand and postnatal depression beforehand, and they measured it again afterwards. And they interpreted it that after the sleep training intervention, the mother's risk of postnatal depression and decreased, their baby's sleep improved. And they kind of left it at that. But when you actually go into that paper and read what they did, for that group who actually received the intervention, yes, they taught them about sort of control crying measures, but they also gave them lots and lots of support. So they sat down and they talked to the parents about how they felt. They talked about making time for themselves, their own well-being. They taught them about normal baby sleep and expectations. So to me, what actually happened there? One group of mothers get all this care and attention and a research nurse basically on call all the time. And the other group said, I've got a real problem with my baby's sleep, please help me, and was ignored. Now, if that one group's mental health is improving, was it being taught about controlled crying, or was it getting all the care and support? And actually, when you look in the study, one of the key questions in it was around what did you find most useful about this? And the key top thing was having someone to talk to. So it was that, it was the value, it was the care. The other thing in terms of the baby's sleep is the main question they based their analysis on was, does your baby have a sleep problem? Now, does your baby have a sleep problem? Everyone goes, yep, my baby's not sleeping at night. If you then teach one group about what normal sleep looks like, what do they say at the other end? Does your baby have a sleep problem? Oh no, they don't actually. Now, of course, they reported that as a reduction in sleep problems. No, it was a reduction in interpretation of sleep problems. So that's just a really good example of a study that gets completely taken out of context. And you will see all over the place if you start looking for it. That is, it says that sleep training is good for mother's mental health and baby sleep, and it's just not. Talking to mothers, caring for them, valuing them, helping them helps, is the only conclusion from that study.
Which is very good to know.
Yes.